Carmel. Verse 21 says, and Elijah came into all the people and said, how long halt you between two opinions? If the Lord be God, follow him, but if Baal, then follow him. And the people answered him not. As we come to this story, it's a challenge that Elijah puts before the people of Israel. And he tells them, how long are you going to be jumping back and forth from this God to this God? We remember that Israel was God's chosen people. God had blessed them. God had given them the word of God. God had led them. God had blessed them, multiplied them. And they so easily turned to other gods. And under this king of Israel, he led them away from God. And God sent Elijah to bring his people back to him. And throughout the Bible, every time God sent prophets, he sent prophets to bring his people back to him. Every prophet was to speak to his people and say, come back to God. So Elijah puts this challenge up before them. And he tells them, whoever can answer from fire, then he is God. And if Baal can answer with fire from heaven, well, then worship him. But if our God, the God of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, if he can answer with fire, then worship him. And it's interesting that said they answered not a word. There was no passion in them. There was no offense in them. They weren't offended. They were just lukewarm. It didn't move them in any way. But the prophets accept the challenge. He tells us in verse 23, let them therefore give us 2 bullocks, and let them choose 1 bullock for themselves. So they bring 2 bullocks. They bring 2 bulls. He tells the prophets of Baal to cut it to pieces. They put it up on the altar. And they began to pray. And the Bible tells us that they prayed from morning until noon. And they prayed fervently. They prayed with all that they had. And at noontime, there was no answer. And Elijah then begins to taunt them and tell them, well, maybe he didn't hear you. Or maybe he's busy. Maybe he's traveling. Maybe he's meditating. Maybe he's asleep. So pray louder. And then it tells us that from noon until the evening, they prayed with even more fire. Even more fervently they prayed. As they began to leap, they began to jump, as they began to cut themselves, as if the blood of the bulls of gold is not enough to elicit action from their God, maybe our own blood will move our God to act on our behalf. And at the end of the day, it says that there was no answer. And there was no answer because there was no God. But I got to thinking about these prophets. And I thought about how faithful they were. And I can tell you, they were a lot more faithful than I am. They prayed from morning to the evening. I don't think I've been able to do that once. I don't think I would even attempt to do this. And my mind would wander. I would get tired. But they had so much faith. They had so much faith that they were ready to sacrifice themselves for their own God. But there was no answer because there was no God. And I thought about that, wouldn't it be wonderful to have that kind of faith? Wouldn't you want to be a giant of faith? But it isn't our faith that is so important. It isn't how great our faith that gives us any worth. It is the God in whom we place our faith in. Had nothing to do about the faith of the prophets of Baal. They could pray all they wanted to. But their faith was in no God. And I prefer to have a little bit of faith in the true and living God. Because even with a little faith, what does the Bible say? Even the size of a mustard seed, you can move mountains. It's not dependent on how big my faith is. It's dependent on how great our God is. And so after there was no answer, then Elijah takes up the challenge. And if the